Hi guys, it is Thursday, July 21st, 2016. I have a update for you for week 19 post-op. I had surgery on March 10th, 2016 at Rex Hospital in Raleigh, North Carolina with Dr. Michael Tyner. I had a biliopancreatic diversion with the duodenal switch, also known as SIPS or SADI or loop DS. Essentially, it's a modified DS. My highest weight was 401. My surgery weight is 379. Last week I came to you at 295.6 and I'd only lost 0.2 pounds. This week or this morning when I weighed in, I'm 289.4. So since my update last week, I'm down 6.2 pounds. So last week might have been a fluke. I'm not entirely sure, but I've lost over 6 pounds since last week. Which obviously I'm happy about. I will go ahead and warn you, and I apologize in advance, I have bronchitis right now. I'm on some good drugs. I'm on some antibiotics as well as some hydrocodone, and I am flying. It's great. No, I'm not flying. I do feel a little bit loopy. I imagine that happens when I take my medicine in the morning before I really eaten a whole lot, so it'll just bear with me. If I start coughing a little bit, that's why. It sounds much worse than it really is. I feel much better now that I've been on medicine. But as a result, this week I haven't done any exercising. I haven't done my treadmill thing at all because, quite honestly, I've been struggling to breathe. You know, I've been coughing constantly, and so I've just been taking it easy this week, trying to rest my body so it can heal as much as possible. So I haven't even done any of my treadmill stuff at all this week. And I've still lost 6 pounds, which is kind of cool. But I also haven't been eating well this week. I haven't been eating very much food at all, quite frankly. I was coughing so much because of the bronchitis that I was like dry heaving. Like my whole body aches. You know when you cough a lot when you have a terrible cold or whatever and your whole body hurts just from like clenching and coughing. So I didn't want to eat anything because I was coughing so much. I was afraid it was all just going to come back up. So I've been drinking lots of liquids. I'm drinking protein shakes, of course, so I get both my liquids and protein in. But it's not been a great week physically with this bronchitis and not exercising and all that. But I still lost some weight. So hopefully today might be a little, I'm not sure when I'll go back on the treadmill. Depends on how I feel. I don't think today, but maybe tomorrow. Okay, so some things that I wanted to talk about today. I noticed a lot of people have been doing these videos. Essentially, it's called, like, you know, Confessions of a Fat Girl or Fat Girl Diaries or that sort of thing. And I thought I didn't think I was going to do it, quite frankly. I saw some of these videos and I thought, wow, that's way too raw for me. I'm just not willing to go there. But I found that I continued to watch them, and I always felt that the people who were doing these videos are incredibly brave, and far more brave than me. But the more videos that I watched, the more that I felt their courage inspired me, and their messages really resonated with me. They were very familiar. And that reminded me why I started this whole channel to begin with. One, I wanted to chronicle my own journey for myself, to see how far I'd come, learn more about myself. And two, I wanted to share and be part of this community. I wanted to, if some of the messages that I say or some of the verbal diarrhea that comes out of my mouth can help somebody else, then that's fantastic, because I find that other people who are doing videos really helped me. So that's why I'm going to come to you and talk to you a little bit today about that. So some things in this update that I'm going to talk about, they aren't specifically food related, but I think it's important backstory to learn how I developed bad eating habits or a bad relationship with food, and that's how I ultimately got to be in this position where I needed to have weight loss surgery. So some of the stuff is going to be tough for me to talk about. Some of it I've never really talked about out loud, and so some of it's going to be difficult for me to articulate or even verbalize out loud to myself, let alone sending it out here to, you know, to the void, to a bunch of strangers. That's really exposing myself, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little nervous to do that, but I'm really hoping that this experience, or me talking about this, will be cathartic for me too. So if I get weepy or something like that, I don't know if I will, but if I do, you know, trust that I'm okay now. But just talking about some old stuff in my past, especially my formative years, you know, can be difficult. So I appreciate your patience and your understanding while I do that. So I've made some notes here of things that, when I was thinking last night about that I was going to take the plunge and talk a little bit about this, that I needed to kind of formalize or organize my thoughts a little bit. So I've got some notes here to kind of help guide me. So if I glance at it, that's why. So I do want to preface it and say that I realize in the grand scheme of things, my problems aren't as severe as other people's. There are a lot of people who probably have, you know, worse childhoods than me, certainly. I wouldn't say that I had an awful childhood, but I think there were events that probably happened that ultimately led to, you know, patterns of behavior that lasted into my adulthood. So thinking about, you know, what I was going to talk about in my confessions, it made me think about my pre-op life, of course. And in order to do that, I need to think about how it all began. You know, as I said, my problems might be minor compared to some other people's, but there's certain events that happened, namely my parents' divorce, that ultimately contributed to reactions and my behavior, like I said, in my formative years, that subsequently developed into like consistent patterns of behavior that have lasted now my entire life, my entire pre-op life, I should say. So here we go. Okay, so I've been fat my entire life, as long as I can remember. But when I look at pictures of me as a child, like young child, I wasn't that big. My parents split up when I was 8 years old, and I'm the oldest of three. So I was 8 years old when my parents split up. My brother would have been 5 and my sister would have been 3. Out of the three of us, I'm the only one that remembers life when mom and dad were together. They don't remember that at all. So I think all they remember is life with mom. It was just the four of us, right? Me, my brother, my sister, and my mom. They don't remember my dad being around, but I do. My dad and I were really close. See, it's already starting to happen. And I will say, my dad and I are okay now. We're great now, actually. So dad and I were really close. I was the firstborn, so he and I had a special bond. And then he left suddenly when I was 8. And of course, my 8-year-old mind, I'm just like, is it my fault? Was I bad? Did I misbehave? Is this my fault that he left? So now mom has to go back to work, right? She's got 3 young ones. She has to go back to work, and dad, of course, paid child support and all that, but mom had to certainly go back to work. So excuse me, I'm sorry. So mom had to go back to work, and so the kids, namely, you know, me, I was only 8, had to pick up additional responsibility when mom or babysitters, you know, couldn't help out. And that it wasn't a whole lot, but I probably felt like I had a lot of responsibility. I was now responsible. You know, mom was at work and I was the oldest, so I was in charge of my brother and my sister in the house, and I was 8. And that of course lasted for several years, but I think I probably felt, or maybe it was self-imposed, that I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. So anyway, like I said, we were all young. Mom had to start working again. And I felt a big hole in my life with the absence of my dad, who I was really close to. And my mom wasn't as present as she used to be, or as available as she used to be, because she was working now. And she had 2 younger ones as well to focus on. Like my brother, like I said, he was 5 and my sister was 3. So I found solace in food. So I had that hole in my life, and I filled it with food. Food made me feel good. Food made me feel really good, and I liked it. It was always there when I wanted it. It was always there for me. You know, even when dad wasn't around or mom wasn't around or whatever, food was always there for me. And it never rejected me. Like I said, I felt a sense of blame, like, was I the cause of this? Why dad left? And I felt that he had rejected me. Food never rejected me. And so it was just a vicious cycle. So food never rejected me, so I kept eating, and then I got fat. And then there was more rejection, right? As you know, especially as a child, if you're big, children are mean. And more rejection, right? It just spiraled out of control. I am part East Indian. My mother was born in India, and she came to Canada when she was like a year old. So I was always darker than the rest of the children at school. And so, because I looked different, I was bigger, I got called things like brown cow all the time. I can remember getting beat up after school and stuff like that, and people chanting brown cow, brown cow. It was tough, man. It was really tough. But, and then, so I'd feel shitty about myself about that. And then what would I do? I would eat, right? And it was just like a vicious cycle. It just kept on and it went from there. So I continued to make poor choices. I rebelled. Now I acted out in other ways apart from poor food choices, but that's not really relevant to today's topic. But things like, I was rebellious jerk. I was constantly lying to everybody in my life, whether it be teachers, my parents, my brother, my sister, myself. I was constantly lying. I would steal things. I would steal food, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But I stole other things. I stole money from my family and stuff like that. I hung around with bad crowds, stuff like that. Just rebelling in any way that I could. Now, I will say that we did visit with our dad like every other weekend, and that was okay. But the relationship was strained. It was definitely affected. When I did act out, and my mom didn't know what to do with me, she was just like at her wit's end. She didn't know what to do. My dad would come in, and he would try to discipline me and say something, and I was a total asshole. I would say things like, "You know what? You gave up any right to tell me what to do the day you walked out the door and left me." Like hurtful things. I was a total jerk. Now, I will say by the time that my relationship with my dad, and in fact, the rest of my family was healed and repaired, I was probably in my early 20s, like 21, something like that. But by that time, I had made so many poor choices, especially related to food, that I had basically established a concrete pattern of behavior that just perpetuated the cycle. I would continue to gain weight. I would try some diets every once in a while, but I always reverted back to that bad behavior. And it was like it came as a result of rejection or isolation or whatever. And the more that I pushed myself away, the more isolated I felt, so the more I would eat. And so, like I said, I would try different diets, but I would always revert back to that behavior. It started in my formative years, and it stuck. It just stuck, and it felt comfortable, and it was what I knew. So, in terms of confessions, I've heard this in a couple of videos, and man, this is tough to say. Like, it's shameful. So when it comes to ordering food from different places, so I've heard some people, and I did this too. I was totally, I totally was guilty of this. When you're calling a takeout place and you're on the phone with them and you're pretending that there's somebody else in the room because you don't really want to acknowledge the fact that you're ordering all of that food for one person. So you have to pretend that there's multiple people in the room, because otherwise they'd be like, seriously, you're going to eat all that food? So I'd be like, oh, what was that you want? Oh, okay. And so and then I would, tell them my order and all that. So that way they didn't know that I was just a big fat pig eating all this food. And I would tell myself, oh, I'm going to save some. I'm going to save some for later. I'll take some for lunch tomorrow or whatever. And, sometimes some of the food made it to the next day, but a lot of the times it didn't. Sometimes when the delivery guy would show up, like I'd hear the knock at the door, and I'd be alone in my apartment or alone or whatever. I'd hear the knock at the door or whatever, and I'd yell, "I'll get it!" Like there's somebody else here about to eat all this food, and like shameful stuff. It's embarrassing. But the things that people will do, to avoid judgment. I can remember being, you know, going through a drive-through, and I wanted to order a few different things, not just a meal, just not like a combo, but a few other things. And I can remember going through and pretending to be on my cell phone, like I'm taking an order from a friend, like I'm on my way to a friend's house, and be like, oh, you want this too? Okay, so I'll get 2 number whatevers. And I would be on the phone pretending that they're on the phone. And I remember when it was happening, like praying, like, please don't let my phone ring while I'm on my phone talking to these people placing my order. Like, just sneaking and lying, and like, it's not even worth it. But that's what I did. Stealing food. I know a lot of people mention this, that they stole food. I did too. I can remember my grandmother would come over. My Dima would come over every once in a while, and she'd always, you know, she was a grandmother, she'd always come over and she'd bring stuff. And she would bring treats for us. And they could be anything. They could have been, you know, full-size candy bars or something like that. And she would always bring one for my brother and my sister, but never me. I was too fat. I was too fat and I didn't need them. So she just wouldn't bring me one. So I'd end up getting resentful, I'm sure. I mean, it was embarrassing when she'd call you out in the middle. She's like, here's one for you, here's one for you, but not for you. And I'm sure she didn't say it like that. I'm sure she didn't say it with that acid tongue, but that's certainly how it felt to me as, you know, a preteen or whatever. So I'd end up resenting it, and then I would ultimately end up trying to steal it from my siblings anyway, because it made me feel good. And so that's what I did. And I didn't give any care or caution or I didn't give a shit about how it would make them feel. But I would steal things like, you know, their Halloween candy and stuff like that. My sister was a saver. Like, she would always save food. She's like that now. Even now to this day, she's always been a saver, whether it be your money or whatever. She saves things. Like, she's always thinking about, you know, the long term, the future. Whereas me, I've always been like an instant gratification kind of girl. Excuse me. So Stephanie, my sister, she would always have something. She would always have something in her room. So if I needed something, I know there's always there. And ultimately that affected my relationship with her. You know, we developed some trust issues. She couldn't trust me because I would steal. I lied to my family. I told you that too. So there was some damage done to my relationships, not just with my parents, but with my siblings too, as a result of this, because of me acting out and stealing food and lying to them and stuff like that. Now, ultimately now we are fine, but I still harbor guilt about it, and I continue to apologize now, even though it's been, I don't know, 1,000 years. And my family are like, you know what, you're good. That was 100 years ago. You were a child, and you know, we're fine now. But even still, I harbor guilt about it. Maybe it's because I haven't forgiven myself. Regardless. So I would always take my sister's food, or my brother's. Stephanie, like I said, my sister, she was really good with saving food. So there was always some there. I can remember we were going to go on a camping trip when I was a child. I was probably, I don't know, between 10 to 12, I would say. So we were going to go on a camping trip with my mom's best friend and her son. And we'd been planning this for a long time. We were just going to, you know, and Mom had done some cooking in advance. And so she had baked a whole bunch of chocolate chip cookies. And she had put them in our garage in a big deep freezer that we had. And she did that well in advance, so that way we could just take them with us when we go on this trip. And she made a lot. She made a lot of them for, you know, several dozen. And I can remember going out there and stealing 2 or 3 cookies at a time, right? And I would do that for days or for weeks or however long. And then I remember when it came to the camping trip, all the cookies were gone. She had made dozens and dozens of cookies, and I had eaten them all. Not all in one night, but over the course of however it was, several weeks. And I was taking 2 or 3 cookies at a time with no regard to, shit, what's going to happen when eventually she opens this up and there's going to be no cookies. But I remember her being so angry, so disappointed. And at my, you know, being sneaky and stealing food, you know, and I remember that, and it's shameful now. I can remember things like being in the Girl Scouts. You know, in Canada they're called brownies and Girl Guides, but you know, when it came to selling Girl Guide cookies or Girl Scout cookies, I would eat boxes of them. I would hoard boxes and I would eat them. And then ultimately my mom had to end up paying for them because I couldn't help myself. I would just eat them. And at the time, I remember when all this was happening, I didn't give a shit about any repercussions or anything like that. It was just, I need it. I need to fill some sort of void in my life. Not that it made any sense, but I need it to make me feel good. And it's sad now to think about that I was living like that. You know, no childhood should, I think, be like that, but I always wanted more. I always wanted the most. I was never any good with sharing food, especially with my siblings, because I would just inhale it, and I always wanted more. I always wanted more. It was never enough. It was never enough. It was almost like validation that I craved so much, but instead I consumed food. I don't know what it was, but it was just a vicious cycle. And it got me to the point where I ultimately was, you know, 401 pounds. Now, like I said, as an adult, I didn't feel that way. I certainly felt bad, but I'd stopped stealing food, obviously, when I was an adult and stuff like that, stealing food and things like that. And, but I had established, you know, behavior. When I felt miserable, when I felt shitty, and I would eat food, and I would try to satiate myself with food. And ultimately, you know, I guess it felt okay in the grand scheme of things. When I look back in hindsight, it didn't make me happy at all. In fact, it just made it worse. So those are some of my issues with food, I guess. It's kind of embarrassing, but that's what got me here. And it's just interesting now, coming from the other side, thinking about my behaviors and how they kind of came to be, how those patterns came to be. I don't know if it was ultimately my parents' divorce. I can't think of another traumatic event that would have changed my behavior. But like I said, looking back and seeing pictures of me, even in kindergarten or something like that, you know, I wasn't that big, but I think maybe around 8 years old is when my behavior started changing. And I think the only thing that I can think of that happened around that time was my parents' divorce. So I know there are a lot of other people who have gone through much, much worse. And I'm not sure how they cope with things, but I guess when I was, you know, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, even into my teens, that's how I cope with things. And, but it is what it is. But I'm looking forward to moving forward, new patterns of behavior, new goals, just a complete paradigm shift for me and my mentality, and what I'm going to do moving forward, what I've resolved to do. So that's about it. So hope you're all doing well. Talk to you later, okay? Bye.